I stood at my mother's dining table on Thanksgiving, surrounded by family, when she looked me dead in the eye and said those words that would change everything. The turkey sat half-carved between us. My brother Derek smirked from across the table while his wife Amanda pretended to focus on cutting food for their kids. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Roger exchanged knowing glances. I had just mentioned my idea about opening a supper club, and the entire table erupted in laughter. My mother, Carol, leaned forward with that cold smile I knew too well and said, "You'll never be invited again if you keep embarrassing this family with your failures." The room went silent. I put down my napkin, stood up without saying a single word, and walked out. Through the window, I could see them still sitting there, already laughing again. 3 weeks passed before I could even think straight. The humiliation burned like acid in my chest every time I replayed that dinner in my mind. I stopped answering calls from my mother. Derek sent a few texts that I deleted without reading. I threw myself into work at the restaurant where I was just another line cook, 32 years old and going nowhere. My studio apartment in Portland felt smaller every day. The walls seemed to close in as I sat surrounded by culinary magazines and business plans scrawled on legal pads. I had a degree from culinary school, sure, but that and $3 would buy me a coffee. My track record spoke louder than any diploma. The food truck that lasted 6 months before I ran out of capital. The catering business that went bankrupt when my partner stole from our accounts. The pop-up dinner series that barely anyone attended because I had no idea how to market myself. Derek, meanwhile, was a successful corporate lawyer with a house in the suburbs, 2 kids, and a wife who looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. He was everything my mother wanted. I was everything she apologized for at family gatherings. But something was different this time. The rage I felt sitting in that apartment wasn't the usual shame spiral. It was fuel. I started researching exclusive supper clubs and speakeasies, places like Rouse in New York, where getting a table required knowing someone who knew someone. The Varnish in Los Angeles, hidden behind a bar. Beretta in San Francisco, with its impossible reservation system. I realized something important. Scarcity creates desire. Exclusivity creates status. What if I could build something so desirable that people would beg for an invitation? I did the math. I needed at least $50,000 to make this work. I had $8,000 in savings, barely enough to cover 3 months of living expenses if I was careful. I put together a business plan and started applying for small business loans. The first bank rejected me in under a week. Poor credit from my previous business failures. The second bank took longer to say no, which somehow felt worse. The third and fourth banks did not even bother with explanations, just formed letters that might as well have said, "Stop wasting our time." I tried finding investors. The first meeting was with a group that funded local restaurants. They listened to my pitch for about 10 minutes before one of them interrupted to ask about my previous ventures. When I explained what happened with the food truck and catering business, they exchanged looks. The meeting ended early. The second investor meeting was worse. The guy actually laughed when I mentioned my concept. Said invitation. Only restaurants were played out, and I was 10 years too late. The third investor knew my brother. I walked into that office and saw Derek's wedding photo on the guy's desk. Turns out, they played golf together. Derek had already warned him that I was unreliable, a dreamer, someone who started projects and never finished them. The meeting lasted 5 minutes. I was behind on rent. My landlord slipped an eviction notice under my door on a Tuesday morning. 3 days to pay or get out. My boss at the restaurant called me into his office and told me he was cutting my hours. Said I seemed distracted, that my head was not in the game. He was right, but I needed those hours to survive. On Christmas Eve, I got a text from Derek. It was a photo of the whole family gathered at my mother's house. Mom, Derek, Amanda, the kids, Aunt Patricia, Uncle Roger, the cousins, everyone except me. The message said, "Mom's happier without you here. Less embarrassment." I sat in my car outside a 24-hour diner and stared at that photo until my eyes blurred. I was done. Finished. Ready to give up completely, and maybe move to some other city where no one knew me as the family failure. That is when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost did not answer. It was a lawyer, a man named Richard Chen, handling my father's estate. My father, who left when I was 12 and who I had not spoken to in 20 years, had died 3 months earlier. He left me something in his will, a property, an old brick warehouse building in a developing neighborhood of Portland. The building had tenants, a failing coffee roaster whose lease was ending in 2 months. The property was worth something, Richard explained, but it needed work. There were back taxes owed, repairs needed. It was not much, but it was mine. I drove to see it the next morning. The neighborhood was rough around the edges, but gentrifying. Coffee shops and art galleries were starting to pop up between the auto repair shops and check cashing places. The warehouse itself was beautiful in a broken-down way. Brick walls, high ceilings, big windows. It had good bones, as they say in real estate. I stood outside that building and felt something I had not felt in months: hope. This was it. This was my chance. My father, who I barely remembered, had given me the one thing I needed: a location. But hope is a dangerous thing when you are broke. I had a building but no money to do anything with it. Property taxes were due in 60 days. The building needed at least $30,000 in immediate repairs just to be up to code. The coffee roaster was moving out, leaving the space trashed and needing a complete renovation. I had traded one impossible situation for another. The gift felt like a curse. I moved into the warehouse illegally, 2 weeks after the coffee roaster left. I could not afford my apartment anymore, and I figured no one would notice if I crashed in the empty building. I set up a sleeping bag in the corner, used a hot plate for cooking, and showered at the 24-hour gym down the street. I took a second job as a night janitor at an office building downtown. Between the line cook job during the day and janitorial work at night, I was sleeping maybe 4 hours if I was lucky. I lost 20 pounds in a month. People at the restaurant started asking if I was sick, but I kept planning. Every spare moment, I was sketching designs for the restaurant, pricing out equipment, developing menus. The coffee roaster had left the space completely destroyed. Broken equipment, grease stains on the walls, holes in the floor. It would cost a fortune to make it usable. That is when Marcus walked back into my life. I ran into him at the farmer's market on a Sunday morning. Marcus Whitley. We went to culinary school together a decade ago. He had done well for himself, owned 2 trendy brunch spots in the Pearl District, always dressed nice, always seemed to have money. He acted surprised to see me, asked what I had been up to. I was too tired to lie, so I told him the truth. About the warehouse, about the dream of opening a supper club, about being broke and desperate. Marcus listened with this concerned expression, nodding along. Then he said something that sounded like salvation. I have been looking for a new project, something different from the brunch scene. What you are describing sounds perfect. What if we partnered up? I provide the capital, you provide the vision and location. We build this thing together. I should have been more careful, should have asked more questions. But I was exhausted and desperate, and someone was finally offering to believe in me. Marcus said he would put in $75,000. That would cover the renovation, equipment, initial operating costs. In exchange, he wanted 60% ownership. I hesitated. 60% meant he had control. But what choice did I have? I had no other options, no other investors, no way to make this happen on my own. We signed the partnership agreement in his lawyer's office. I did not have money for my own lawyer to review it. Marcus assured me it was standard stuff, just protecting both our interests. I signed. The build-out began immediately. We hired contractors to gut the space and start fresh. I spent weeks designing every detail. 30 intimate seats arranged around an open kitchen so guests could watch us cook. Exposed brick walls, vintage chandeliers I found at salvage yards. A speakeasy aesthetic, with a hidden entrance through what would look like a used bookshop from the street. I was living my dream. Working 18-hour days between my jobs and the renovation. But it felt worth it. This was happening. This was real. Then Marcus started changing things without asking me. He brought in a designer who redid my layout, made the space bigger, added more tables. When I objected, he said we needed more seats to be profitable. He hired an expensive contractor to replace the perfectly good contractor I had found. Said we needed someone more experienced, even though it doubled our costs. He kept talking about bringing in his own head chef, pushing me toward a general manager role. I pushed back, said I was the chef. That was the whole point. He smiled and said we would discuss it later. I started noticing other things. Charges on our shared account that did not make sense. Expensive equipment that never showed up at the restaurant. When I asked Marcus about it, he waved me off, said he was handling the business side, and I should focus on the creative. One day I was at City Hall pulling permits and noticed something wrong. All the permits were in Marcus's name only. Not the restaurant's name, not both our names, just his. I confronted him that evening at the construction site. He was not even apologetic. Said it was standard business practice, that as majority owner it made sense for permits to be in his name. I went home and actually read the partnership agreement for the first time. Really read it. The language was brutal. Marcus had control over all major decisions. Could outvote me on everything. Could even buy me out at a price he determined if he felt I was not fulfilling my duties as a partner. I was trapped. When I told him I wanted to renegotiate, wanted a lawyer to review everything, Marcus's whole demeanor changed. The friendly concern disappeared. He looked at me like I was an idiot. You should be grateful, he said. Without me, you would be living in that warehouse eating ramen for the rest of your life. This is happening because of my money, my reputation, my connections. You are just the guy with the building. I threatened to walk away. He laughed. Walk away? With what? You signed a contract. You leave now. I keep the building. Keep everything we have built. And sue you for breach. You will lose. And you will lose the property your dead daddy left you. I wanted to hit him. Instead, I left before I did something stupid. A week later, one of the contractors pulled me aside. Nice guy named Frank, who felt bad about what was happening. He showed me the invoices. Marcus had been billing personal expenses to the restaurant renovation, new appliances for his own home, furniture for his other restaurants, even a car lease. Tens of thousands of dollars that should have gone to our project. It was fraud, money laundering. I had proof. I confronted Marcus with copies of the invoices. He barely reacted. Prove it, he said. Those are legitimate business expenses, properly documented. Or at least, that is what my accountant will say. Meanwhile, I have been documenting every decision you have made, every expense you approved. I have emails with your name on them authorizing all of this. You think you are setting me up? I have been setting you up since day one. He pulled out a folder full of printouts, emails that looked like they came from my address, approving expenses, signing off on questionable purchases. I never sent those emails. He had fabricated them. Marcus sat down and explained my options very calmly. I could accept a new agreement. Silent partner. 10% ownership. No decision-making power. Keep my mouth shut, and maybe make a little money if the restaurant succeeded. Or he would go to the authorities with his fabricated evidence. Claim I had been embezzling. Frame me for his crimes. With my history of failed businesses, who would believe me over him? You have 24 hours, he said. Choose wisely. I signed the new agreement the next day. 10% ownership. No control. My dream had been stolen, and there was nothing I could do about it. The next month was the lowest point of my life. Marcus brought in his own team and pushed me further to the edges. My title became beverage manager, which was insulting, considering I was a trained chef, and this was supposed to be my restaurant. The space was nearly complete, and it looked nothing like what I had envisioned. Marcus had stripped away the intimate, exclusive feel and turned it into something generic and trying too hard. More tables, flashier decor, loud music. He named it the Capitol and did press interviews where he talked about his vision, his concept, his restaurant. My name was not mentioned once. I started showing up late, sometimes drunk. The staff Marcus hired looked at me with pity. I was the guy who used to own the place, now just another employee barely holding on. The soft opening was a disaster. Marcus invited investors and food press. His head chef, some guy from one of his brunch places, produced mediocre food that tried to be too many things at once. The concept was muddled. Were we fine dining? Casual upscale? Fusion? No one knew, least of all Marcus. The reviews were brutal. One food critic wrote, "The Capitol tries hard to be exclusive, but lacks soul. More style than substance. And even the style feels borrowed." Another said, "Unclear vision and inconsistent execution. Someone should ask, who is actually running this place?" Marcus blamed me publicly, told people the beverage program was weak, that I had dropped the ball, that he was considering replacing me. I was too defeated to even defend myself. I was cleaning out a storage area in the building's basement one night, looking for some old wine racks, when I found boxes I had never seen before. They were full of my father's belongings, things that must have been left here when he owned the property. I sat on the concrete floor and went through them. Old menus from restaurants where he had worked, photos of him in chef's whites, looking young and happy. Letters. So many letters. My father had been a chef, a real one. He worked fine dining in San Francisco during the 70s and 80s. Places I had read about in culinary school. Legendary restaurants that shaped California cuisine. The letters told a different story than the one I grew up believing. He did not just abandon us. My mother, Carol, had a gambling problem. Serious debt. She had stolen money from the restaurant where my father worked, forged his signature on checks. She threatened to destroy his career if he did not pay off her debts. He left to protect us. Thought if he disappeared, she would stop using him as a bank. He tried to maintain contact, but my mother blocked every attempt. She told us he did not want us, that he chose his career over his family. It was all lies. The last letter was addressed to me but never sent. It was dated 5 years ago. Vernon, it read, "I don't know if you will ever read this, but I need you to know the truth. Your mother made me choose between destroying my career and losing my family. I chose to leave so she could not hurt you kids with her problems. I have thought about you every day. I heard you went to culinary school. That makes me so proud. You have the gift, son. Don't let anyone take it from you. I am leaving you my building, because I know you will do something meaningful with it. Be better than I was. Be braver. Love, Dad." I sat there crying in that basement, surrounded by evidence that my entire childhood was built on lies. I was still sitting there 2 hours later when someone called down the stairs. "Hello? Anyone down here?" It was Grace. Grace Chen. She worked at the office building where I did janitorial work. We had talked a few times during her late-night work sessions, casual conversations while I emptied trash cans and she reviewed contracts at her desk. She had stopped by the restaurant looking for me. One of the staff told her I might be in the basement. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. We ended up at an all-night diner at 3 in the morning. I told her everything. About my family. About Marcus. about the partnership and the fraud and how completely trapped I was. I showed her the letters from my father. Grace listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked if she could see the partnership agreement. I laughed bitterly. What good would that do? I specialize in small business law and contract disputes, she said quietly. Let me look at it. I met her at her office the next evening. She had been up all night reviewing the documents. Her desk was covered in highlighted papers and sticky notes. Marcus made mistakes, she said. Critical ones. The agreement is not properly executed. Missing signatures on key addendums. And these permits he pulled in his own name? For your property? That is illegal. He has no authority to pull permits for property he does not own. She explained that I could void the partnership. But the timing was everything. The restaurant's official grand opening was scheduled for 3 weeks out. If I voided it now, I would have a half-finished restaurant, no money, and Marcus would absolutely sue me for everything. Grace suggested we let Marcus finish the renovation using his money. Then, right before the grand opening, we void the partnership and take back control. It was risky. If Marcus caught on, he could stop work immediately and tie everything up in court. I decided to go forward with the plan. What choice did I have? For 2 weeks I played along, showed up to work, kept my head down, let Marcus think he had broken me. Grace worked behind the scenes, preparing all the legal paperwork. We planned to serve Marcus with papers on a Thursday afternoon, 5 days before the scheduled grand opening. That Wednesday night, I could not sleep. I drove to the warehouse around 2 in the morning, just to walk through the space one more time before everything changed. The building was on fire. Flames were shooting out of the windows. The fire department was already there, trucks everywhere, firefighters hosing down the building. I jumped out of my car and ran toward it, but a firefighter grabbed me. The fire marshal told me it was definitely arson. They found evidence of accelerant, multiple points of ignition. Professional job. I immediately thought of Marcus. He must have found out about the legal action. Then the police showed up and arrested me. Marcus had already reported me to the authorities, claimed I had been unstable, threatening, dangerous. He showed them text messages, supposedly from me, threatening to burn it all down if I did not get what I wanted. The texts were fake, but they looked real. My phone number, my name. I was charged with arson, facing years in prison. Everything I owned was in that building, including the evidence from my father. It was all gone. I sat in county jail trying to understand how my life had gotten to this point. I had lost everything. Again. But this time was different. This time, I was going to prison for something I did not do. I spent 2 weeks in county jail before Grace posted my bail, $50,000. She took out a personal loan against her own apartment to get me out. When I asked why she would do that for someone she barely knew, she just said, "Because I believe you." No one had ever said that to me before. Not my family, not my previous partners, not anyone. Grace believed me. My trial was set for 4 months away. The media coverage was brutal. Local news ran stories about the failed chef who burned down his own restaurant. My face was everywhere. Vernon Hayes. From culinary dreams to arson charges. My mother called me for the first time in months. I thought maybe she was reaching out to help. Instead, she said, "I told you so. I knew you would end up like this." Then she hung up. Grace worked around the clock building my defense. She discovered Marcus had done this before. 2 other chefs in different cities. Same pattern. Befriend struggling chef. Offer partnership. Take control. Push them out. In one case, there had been a suspicious fire that was never solved. She tracked down these former partners. Both agreed to testify about Marcus's pattern of behavior. But it was all circumstantial. It did not prove Marcus started this specific fire. The breakthrough came from the insurance angle. Grace discovered Marcus had taken out a massive insurance policy on the building just 3 weeks before the fire. $2 million. The building was worth maybe $400,000 at most. She brought this to the fire marshal and police. The investigation shifted. They started looking at Marcus seriously. But Marcus had an airtight alibi. He was at a charity event the night of the fire, photographed with 50 witnesses, posted all over social media. Grace's law firm found out she was using company resources for pro bono work. They gave her an ultimatum: drop my case or lose her job. She quit on the spot, opened her own practice with me as her first client. I realized then that I was falling in love with her. This woman who barely knew me had risked everything to help me. But I was too focused on survival to tell her. We worked together every day, preparing for trial. She believed we could win, but I was not so sure. The evidence against me looked bad. Fake texts, my financial motive, my history of failed businesses. A jury might convict me, just based on that. Then Frank, the contractor who had shown me evidence of Marcus's fraud, reached out to Grace. He had been carrying guilt for months. He had something that could change everything. During the renovation, Frank had installed security cameras throughout the building. Standard practice for construction sites to prevent theft. He was supposed to remove them when the work was done, but he had not gotten around to it yet. The cameras were still running the night of the fire. More importantly, Frank had footage from 2 weeks before the fire. Footage of Marcus meeting with a man in the empty restaurant late at night. Frank recognized the man. Local criminal. Known for arson for hire. The footage showed Marcus walking this man through the building, pointing at specific areas, especially the electrical systems, coaching him on how to make it look like faulty wiring. Frank had been paid by Marcus to keep quiet about the cameras and to lose the footage. But he could not live with himself. He gave Grace everything. Grace took the evidence to the prosecutors immediately. They arrested Marcus within 24 hours, charged him with arson, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other crimes. All charges against me were dropped. The story exploded in the media. Now I was the victim, the chef whose dream was stolen by a con man. Public opinion shifted overnight. Marcus's other restaurants started failing as the truth came out. His former partners filed civil suits. The insurance company sued him. His whole empire collapsed. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt empty. My restaurant was still gone. The building was a burned-out shell. I had nothing. Then the insurance company called. Not Marcus's fraudulent policy, but the legitimate coverage I had on the inherited property. They were paying out for the damage. $300,000. It was more than enough to rebuild. More than I ever thought I would have. I could actually do this. Build the restaurant I always wanted. The right way this time. But there was a catch. The insurance stipulation required new construction to begin within 90 days, or the payout would be reduced by half. I had 3 months to start building, or lose $150,000. I went to file for new permits. That is when I discovered the next obstacle. The neighborhood association, influenced by several of Marcus's friends who sat on the board, was threatening to block any restaurant permits. They claimed the property was now a safety concern, that it attracted criminal elements, that the neighborhood did not want it. What they really wanted was for me to sell the lot to a developer who would build condos. They had already lined up a buyer who was friends with the board president. I had money, but faced a bureaucratic nightmare. The clock was ticking. I was fighting an entire system now, not just one person. Grace suggested we fight back publicly, stop hiding, stop being defensive, and tell my story. She had connections with a local food magazine, pitched them a feature about my journey. The writer was skeptical at first. Another sob story about a struggling chef. But when she heard the details, about Marcus, about the arson, about my family rejection, she got excited. This was bigger than a restaurant story. This was about perseverance, corruption, and redemption. The article ran 6 weeks after the charges against me were dropped. The response was overwhelming. It got picked up by national food media. Bon Appetit did a follow-up. Eater wrote about Marcus's pattern of exploiting young chefs. The narrative became about fighting back against corruption in the restaurant industry. Someone started a GoFundMe to help with my legal fees and rebuilding costs. I did not ask for it, did not even know about it, until Grace showed me. It raised $70,000 in 2 weeks. People I had never met sending money with messages of support. Famous chefs started reaching out, offering advice, connections, encouragement. One sent me a signed copy of his cookbook with a note that said, "Keep cooking." The industry needs people with heart, but I still had to deal with the neighborhood association. Their next meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks out. They were planning to vote on whether to support my permit application or recommend denial to the city. I spent those weeks working the neighborhood like a political campaign. Grace helped me strategize. We went door to door, talking to residents, business owners, community members. Most had no idea what was happening. Just knew there was some controversy about the burned building. I pitched them a different vision. Not just a restaurant, but a community culinary center. The front part would have a teaching kitchen, offering free cooking classes for neighborhood kids. A job training program for people trying to get back on their feet. Community event space. The back part would be the invitation-only supper club, but that would fund all the community programs. People responded to that. Local business owners who had been neutral started supporting me. The high school principal loved the idea of partnering for their culinary arts program. I got endorsements from a dozen neighborhood organizations. I also reached out to contacts from my father's old recipe journal. Most were retired or had moved on. But one name stood out. Harold Patterson. My father had mentioned him multiple times, called him his best friend in the business. Harold was now a famous retired chef. Had worked at some of the most prestigious restaurants in America. Won a James Beard Award. Written 3 cookbooks. I found his contact through a mutual connection and sent him a letter explaining who I was. He called me 2 days later. His voice got emotional when he talked about my father. They had worked together in San Francisco for 5 years. My father, he said, was destined for greatness but walked away from it all. Your dad could have been one of the greats, Harold told me. But he chose you kids over his career. That takes more courage than any kitchen ever will. Harold agreed to meet me in Portland. We spent 6 hours together, looking at my plans, talking about my father's recipes, discussing my vision. At the end, he offered to invest $50,000 and mentor me personally. More importantly, he agreed to publicly endorse my project. Harold had celebrity status in the food world. His name carried weight. With his support, the neighborhood association could not ignore me. I redesigned the space to reflect the dual mission. Front section with the community kitchen, bright and welcoming, open to everyone. Back section with the intimate supper club, hidden behind a bookshelf door, only 20 seats around an open kitchen. I would call it Second Chances, with the subtitle, A Supper Club. Using my father's recipes as a foundation, but making them my own. Every dish would tell a story. The neighborhood association meeting was packed. Over 100 people showed up, most supporting me. I presented my vision, showed the architectural plans, explained the community programs. Harold stood up and spoke about my father's legacy and my commitment to the craft. The board members who opposed me looked uncomfortable. They had not expected this level of community support. When it came time to vote, they approved my permits unanimously. The holdouts could not vote against me publicly with that many people watching. Construction began the next week. I was on site every day, working alongside the contractors. Grace had essentially become my business partner, handling all the legal and administrative side. We still had not defined what we were to each other, but we were together constantly. Harold came to Portland twice a month to work with me on menu development. He taught me techniques my father had mastered, shared stories, pushed me to be better. I hired staff carefully. Some were people I had worked with before who believed in me. Others were people getting second chances like me. Former inmates trying to rebuild their lives. People in recovery. Single parents needing flexible hours. I wanted the restaurant to live up to its name. The space came together over 4 months. Rustic but refined. Warm lighting, comfortable but elegant. The teaching kitchen in front was bright and inviting. The supper club in back was intimate and sophisticated. As opening day approached, I felt something I had not felt in years. Not hope, which can be fragile. Confidence. I knew I could do this. I knew the food would be excellent. I knew we had built something meaningful. But doubt crept in during the final week. Imposter syndrome hit hard. What if I failed again? What if this was just another disaster waiting to happen? What if my family was right about me all along? 3 days before the soft opening, I was at the restaurant, going over final details when someone knocked on the front door. We were not open yet. Sign clearly said so. I walked over to tell whoever it was to come back next week. It was my mother. Carol stood there alone, dressed nicely, with a hesitant expression I had never seen on her face before. She said she had heard about everything, seen the media coverage, knew about the opening. "I want to support family," she said. "I know things have been hard between us, but you are still my son. I would like to be included in the opening." I stood there, hand on the door, not sure what to feel. Part of me wanted her validation so badly. The little kid in me who never felt good enough was screaming to let her in, to finally make her proud. But I was not that kid anymore. Before I could respond, Derek pulled up in his car. He got out, straightened his tie, walked over with that lawyer confidence. "Vernon," he said. "We should talk." They had come together, planned this. I invited them in, locked the door behind us. We sat at one of the tables in the community kitchen area. My mother did her performance, talked about how worried she had been, how she always knew I had potential, how she wanted to make amends. Derek nodded along, added his own apologies about not being more supportive. Then they got to the real reason they came. A restaurant group had contacted them. Big company that franchised successful concepts. They had heard about second chances, loved the story, wanted to discuss franchising opportunities. The group had reached out to Derek because he was my brother, figured family would be involved. Derek and my mother wanted to be my representatives in the deal. They felt they deserved a cut, an ownership stake, something for believing in me all along. The audacity was breathtaking. They had done nothing but tear me down, humiliate me, abandon me when I needed support. Now that I was on the verge of success, they wanted a piece. I asked them to leave. My mother's face shifted, the mask dropping. She threatened to make a scene at the opening, to tell reporters that I had abandoned my family, that I was unstable and vindictive. Derek pulled out his phone, said he had lawyers ready to file claims against the business, that the building had been family property, and they deserved compensation. I told them to do whatever they wanted. Then I called Grace, who was my lawyer now, and put her on speaker. She very calmly explained that any harassment, any defamation, any attempts to interfere with the business would result in immediate legal action. She had already documented their previous behavior, had witnesses, had recordings. They left angry. I knew this was not over. 2 days before the opening, I met my mother and Derek at a coffee shop. They had insisted on one more conversation. They brought a lawyer. The lawyer laid it out. They were claiming rights to the property because it was family property from my father. They were threatening to file a lawsuit, saying my father was mentally incompetent when he made his will, that he had been estranged from the family for so long he did not understand what he was doing. A lawsuit like that would tie everything up in probate, delay the opening indefinitely, destroy the momentum I had built. Even if they lost eventually, the damage would be done. Derek leaned back with this smug expression. "We are family, Vernon. We should be partners. 30% ownership, and we drop the whole thing. It is a good deal. My mother played her role. Said she had been worried about me all along. That she just wanted what was best for me. That family should stick together. Their lawyer waited for my response, probably expecting me to fold. That is when Grace spoke up. I had not realized she was recording the whole conversation on her phone. Oregon is a one-party consent state. Everything they had just said, every threat, every demand, was documented. Grace introduced herself as my lawyer. Their lawyer looked uncomfortable. Grace calmly explained that my father's will was ironclad, properly executed, with documented proof of his mental competency at the time. She had already had it reviewed by probate specialists. More importantly, what they were doing right now was extortion, making threats to extract money. A crime. She had it all on recording. She slid a document across the table. A cease and desist order. If they made any further contact, filed any claims, or interfered with my business in any way, she would file criminal complaints and civil suits. They had one chance to walk away. My mother's mask fell completely. She started screaming about how ungrateful I was, how she had raised me, how I owed her everything. She brought up every childhood mistake, every failure, every embarrassment, called me worthless, said I would always be a disappointment. Derek joined in, said I had always been jealous of him, that I could never handle that he was more successful, that this restaurant would fail just like everything else I touched. Other people in the coffee shop were watching now. Some had their phones out, recording. My mother and Derek were too angry to notice or care. I stayed calm. Let them expose themselves. Let everyone see who they really were. Finally, I spoke. You're not welcome at my opening. You are not welcome in my life. The only thing you ever gave me was motivation to prove you wrong. And I did. Thank you for that lesson. But we are done. I walked out with Grace. Behind me, I could hear my mother still yelling. The video of that confrontation was online within hours. Someone had posted it, and it spread quickly. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of me. People sharing their own stories of toxic families, of having to cut ties with parents or siblings who only brought them down. My mother and Derek became minor villains on social media. The face of toxic family dynamics. Part of me felt bad about that. But mostly, I felt relief. The soft opening was scheduled for the next evening. 20 carefully selected guests. Food critics, industry professionals, community supporters who had helped along the way. Harold was flying in. Grace's parents were coming. It was going to be perfect. I spent the day prepping with my team. We ran through the menu 3 times. 5 courses, each one telling part of the story. My father's legacy, my journey, the community we were building. First course was my father's signature fish preparation from the 70s. Branzino with lemon and herbs, simple but perfect, presented on my modern plateware. Second course was a soup that represented my time in the wilderness. Dark, rich, complex, with a bright note of hope at the end. Third course was the main. Short ribs braised for 18 hours in my father's secret recipe, served with vegetables from the farmer's market where I ran into Marcus that day. Bitter and sweet on the same plate. Fourth course was a palate cleanser. Fresh and clean, representing new beginnings. Fifth course was dessert, inspired by the last memory I had of my father before he left. Apple pie, but deconstructed, refined, elevated. Childhood comfort made sophisticated. The first guests arrived at 7. The community kitchen space was quiet, closed for the evening. They walked through, admiring the teaching space. Then I opened the hidden door and led them into the supper club. The space glowed. Candles on every table, warm light from the vintage fixtures. The open kitchen visible but not intrusive. Soft jazz playing. It felt magical. Service began. My team moved like a machine. Every plate was perfect. I could see guests' reactions. the way their eyes closed when they tasted something special. The conversations quieting as they focused on the food. Harold gave a toast during the third course. Talked about my father, about legacy, about second chances. Said he was proud to be part of this. Everything was perfect, until halfway through the fourth course when one of my staff came to the kitchen, looking stressed. "Vernon, you need to come out front. Now." I stepped out of the kitchen. Through the front windows, I could see my mother and Derek outside on the sidewalk. They were drunk, loud, causing a scene. The second seating was arriving. Guests were trying to get past my mother, who was blocking the entrance, demanding to be let in. I walked outside. Grace followed me. A small crowd had gathered. Derek was filming everything on his phone, probably thinking he could use it as evidence of something. My mother saw me and launched into another tirade about how ungrateful I was, how I had shut out my family, how I was keeping her from her own son's business. She was loud enough that people inside could hear. The perfect evening was falling apart. I took out my phone and called the police. Non-emergency line. Explained the situation calmly. They said a unit was on the way. My mother kept screaming. Derek kept filming. Some of the arriving guests were recording too. This was going to be online, another viral moment. The police arrived quickly. I showed them the cease and desist order. Explained that these people were harassing me and my guests, that they had been warned to stay away. My mother tried to play victim with the officers. Said I was her son, that she had rights, that this was family business. I produced the documentation showing I was the sole owner, that they had no claim, that they were trespassing. The police asked them to leave. Derek started arguing about his rights as a citizen. One of the officers cut him off, said they could leave voluntarily or be arrested for disturbing the peace. As they were being escorted to their car, my mother tried one last time. "Loud enough for everyone to hear," she said. "You drove your father away. You were too much to handle. Too much trouble. He left because of you. And you will fail at this just like you failed at everything else. You are a disappointment." The words hit me like a physical blow, all those old wounds tearing open. The little kid inside me who believed it was his fault, who carried that guilt for 20 years. I froze. Everyone was watching. This was supposed to be my triumphant moment, and instead, I was standing on the sidewalk being destroyed by my mother in front of guests, staff, and strangers recording on their phones. Then Harold stepped forward from the crowd. I had not seen him come outside. He had been having a cigarette between courses. His voice carried, clear and strong. "That is a lie, Carol." I was there. I knew Vernon's father. I worked with him. Everyone went quiet. My mother looked shocked. Harold continued, speaking to the crowd as much as to her. "Vernon's father left because you had a gambling problem. Because you stole from the restaurant where he worked. Because you threatened to destroy his career if he did not pay your debts. He left to protect his children from your manipulation. I have the letters. I have the financial records. He tried to stay in touch, and you blocked him at every turn. You poisoned your kids against him." He pulled out his phone, showed bank statements, copies of old letters my father had given him for safekeeping decades ago. Evidence of everything. Vernon's father talked about his son until the day he died. He was proud of him. And he would be so proud of what Vernon has become despite what you put him through. The crowd was silent. My mother's face went white. Derek stood frozen, his phone still recording. Harold walked over and hugged me. I was shaking. 20 years of lies exposed in front of everyone. My mother and Derek got in their car and left quickly. The crowd started dispersing. Someone started clapping. Then others joined. I did not feel triumphant. I felt like I was falling apart. Grace took my hand. "We should get back inside. Your guests are waiting." I wanted to run, hide, process everything I had just learned. But I had a restaurant full of people who believed in me. I had food to serve. I walked back into the kitchen. My staff looked at me, worried. I took a deep breath. Let us give them the best meal of their lives. We finished service. Every plate went out perfect. When I came out to thank the guests after the final course, they gave me a standing ovation. Several people were crying, not just because of the food, but because they had witnessed something real. Pain and redemption served on the same table. Harold gave another toast. To my father, to second chances, to courage in the face of cruelty. The room raised their glasses. A food critic came up to me after, said she had already written her review in her head. 5 stars. Said what I had created was not just a restaurant, but a testament to resilience. I should have felt happy. Instead, I felt hollow. My foundation had been shattered. Everything I believed about my childhood, my father, myself, was wrong. Grace stayed with me that night after everyone left. We sat in the empty restaurant, and I cried for the first time in years. Cried for my father, for the relationship we never got to have, for the little boy who thought he was the reason his dad left. He loved you, Grace said. That is what matters. He left you this building, this chance. He believed in you when no one else did. I realized she was right. My father had given me more than property. He had given me permission to be myself, to follow my dreams, to build something meaningful. The ultimate second chance. The next morning, reviews started posting online. Every single one was positive, glowing. They talked about the food, the concept, the story. One critic wrote, "Second Chances is more than a restaurant. It is proof that where you come from does not determine where you end up." Reservation requests flooded in. We had a waiting list of 3 months within 48 hours. National food publications wanted to feature us. The story had gone beyond Portland, beyond the food world even. But I did not care about any of that. I cared that I had built something true, something my father would have been proud of. Service that opening night taught me something important. I could do this. Not just cook, but lead, create, build something lasting. The emotional confrontation outside had not destroyed the evening. If anything, it made it more real, more human. Over the next 3 months, Second Chances found its rhythm. We refined the operation until it ran like a precision instrument. The community kitchen during the day became a hub. Cooking classes for neighborhood kids filled up weeks in advance. The job training program graduated its first group of students, all of them finding positions at restaurants around Portland. The supper club in the evenings became exactly what I had envisioned. Invitation only, but not in a pretentious way. Each guest could invite one new person after dining. It created organic growth and a sense of community rather than exclusivity for its own sake. We served dinner Thursday through Sunday, 20 guests per night, 4 seatings per week, 80 covers total, intentionally small. I could maintain quality, be present for every service, know every guest. The reservation list grew to 6 months. People were calling from other cities, wanting to visit Portland just to eat at Second Chances. Food writers called it one of the hardest reservations in America, but it never felt like work. Every night, I watched people's faces as they experienced food that meant something, that told a story, that connected them to something bigger than themselves. Grace and I made our relationship official. She moved some of her practice into the restaurant's office space. We were partners in every sense. She handled the business side while I focused on the kitchen. But we made all major decisions together. Harold became a regular fixture. He would fly in once a month, cook alongside us, mentor my staff. He brought other famous chefs to dine, which created buzz, but also validation from the industry. 6 months after opening, we were profitable. Not just surviving, but thriving. I was making more money than I ever had. But more importantly, I was happy. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The community impact was real. 3 kids from our cooking classes had decided to pursue culinary careers. 2 graduates from our job training program had been promoted to sous chef positions at other restaurants. The neighborhood association that tried to block us now held their meetings in our community kitchen space. I got offers for everything. Reality TV shows wanting to document my journey. Book deals. Consulting opportunities. A major restaurant group offered to franchise the concept, wanted to open second chances locations in 10 cities. I turned them all down. This was not about building an empire. It was about doing one thing excellently, with intention and heart. My father would have understood that. He had walked away from fame to protect his family. I was choosing intimacy over expansion for the same reason. Some things matter more than growth. One Saturday evening in early autumn, we were getting ready for service. The restaurant was fully booked. The kitchen staff was prepping. Everything was running smoothly. Grace came back from the front, looking uncomfortable. "There are 3 people outside," she said. "They claim they are on the list." I knew before she said it. I walked to the front entrance. Through the glass door, I could see them. My mother Carol, my brother Derek, and his wife Amanda. They were dressed nicely, trying to look dignified. I stepped outside. They had clearly rehearsed this. My mother smiled, a brittle, fake expression. "Vernon," she said. "We would like to reconcile. Over dinner." "It is time to let the past be past." Derek nodded. "We are family. We should not let disagreements keep us apart." Amanda said nothing, just looked uncomfortable. They wanted to be seen here. Now that Second Chances was successful, now that I was being written about in magazines, they wanted to be associated with it, probably hoping for photos they could post on social media. I did not get angry, did not raise my voice. I had learned something important over the past year. Their opinion of me did not matter anymore. "This is an invitation-only establishment," I said calmly. My mother's smile faltered. "We are your family. Family is the people who believed in me when I had nothing. You are not on the list." Derek tried a different approach. "Come on, Vernon. We are sorry, okay? Let us move forward." His apology was hollow. I could see it in his eyes. He did not think he had done anything wrong. He thought enough time had passed that I should just get over it. "I built this place for people who support each other," I said. "Who lift each other up. That is not you. That has never been you." Amanda finally spoke. "Vernon, please. We just want to talk." I cut her off gently. "You taught me an important lesson. You showed me exactly what I did not want to become. I am grateful for that. But there is no seat for you here." I turned and walked back inside. Through the window, I watched them stand there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then they left. I felt nothing but peace. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering hurt. They were just people I used to know, trying to claim connection to something they had no part in building. Grace found me in the kitchen. The staff had noticed what happened, looked concerned. I smiled. Let us give our guests the best night of their lives. Service was flawless. Between courses, I visited tables, shared stories about the dishes, connected with guests. This was what it was all about. Not revenge, not proving anyone wrong, but creating moments of joy and connection. We served the final course around 10:30. Dessert inspired by my father's last letter. Apple tart with vanilla cream and brown butter crumble. Simple ingredients, elevated with technique and care. Childhood comfort, made sophisticated. I plated each one myself, thinking about the journey that brought me here. From that humiliating Thanksgiving dinner to this moment. From sleeping in an empty warehouse to running one of Portland's most respected restaurants. The last guests left around 11:30, happy and full. My staff cleaned up, laughing and sharing stories from the night. This was my real family. People who showed up every day, who believed in the vision, who cared about excellence. Grace came into the kitchen, kissed me. Another perfect night. Harold was the last to leave. He pulled me aside, held my shoulders, looked me in the eye. "Your father is smiling somewhere," he said. "You became everything he hoped you would be." After everyone left, I locked up and stood outside for a moment. The neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights reflecting off wet pavement from an earlier rain. My restaurant glowing warm behind me. I thought about sitting in my car a year ago, driving away from that Thanksgiving dinner with tears streaming down my face. My mother's words echoing in my head. "You'll never be invited again." She was right in a way. I was never invited back to her table. But I did not need her invitation anymore. I had built my own table, and people were lining up for months just to sit at it. That was the thing about second chances. Nobody gives them to you. You build them yourself, one choice at a time, one day at a time. You build them with the people who believe in you, who show up when things are hard, who see your potential even when you cannot. Success is not about proving others wrong. It is about proving yourself right. About trusting your vision even when everyone else thinks you are crazy. About building something meaningful with people who matter. My father left me more than a building. He left me a lesson about courage, about walking away from toxicity, even when it costs you everything, about choosing yourself and your dreams over the approval of people who will never be satisfied. I turned off the lights, headed home with Grace. Tomorrow, we would do it all again. Another service, another chance to create something beautiful, another opportunity to give someone else a second chance. And that was more than enough. That was everything. The greatest revenge is not proving them wrong. It is building a life so full of meaning that their approval becomes irrelevant. It is finding peace with yourself and surrounding yourself with people who celebrate you rather than diminish you. My mother wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to believe I would never amount to anything. Instead, she gave me fuel. Her rejection became my motivation. Her doubt became my determination. I built second chances, not to show her what she missed. I built it because I finally understood what my father knew all along. That sometimes the people who are supposed to support you cannot or will not. And when that happens, you find new people. You build a new family. You create your own belonging. Second chances was never just about food. It was about proving that your past does not define your future. That failure is not final. That the people who reject you do not get to write your story. Every person who walked through that door, every kid who took a cooking class, every graduate of our job training program was proof of that lesson. We were all rebuilding something, finding our way back to ourselves, creating meaning from pain. And in the end, that was the only invitation that mattered. The one you give yourself. Permission to try again. To believe again. To build something beautiful from the ashes of everything that burned down. My mother stood outside my restaurant asking for a seat. I smiled and walked away. Not because I was cruel, but because I had finally learned the most important lesson of all. You cannot build something new while carrying people who want to keep you small. You cannot move forward while looking back for approval from people who never saw your value. You cannot thrive while trying to convince those who have already made up their minds about you. Sometimes love means walking away. Sometimes strength means saying no. Sometimes success means building a table where everyone is welcome except the people who spent years telling you that you did not deserve a seat. Second chances was my second chance. But it was also my first choice. The first time I chose myself, my vision, my worth, over someone else's opinion of me. And that made all the difference. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life who made you feel like you would never succeed? Someone who doubted you, dismissed your dreams, or made you feel small. How did you prove them wrong? Or are you still working on it? Share your story in the comments. I would love to hear how you built your own second chance. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that your past does not determine your future, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about resilience, redemption, and finding your way back to yourself. And share this with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to start over, never too late to build something meaningful, never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that the people who reject you do not get to define you. You define you. And sometimes, the greatest gift is being underestimated, because it gives you the freedom to become exactly who you were meant to be. Keep building your dreams. Keep surrounding yourself with people who believe in you. And remember, second chances are not given. They are built. One brave choice at a time.